Kia ora and welcome to Talking Dairy. I'm your host, Jack McGowan from DairyNZ. It's great to have you with us. Today we're talking about more than just water quality. We're looking at the big picture, which is a holistic catchment approach. That means improving our waterways, creating better stream habitats and boosting biodiversity. And it's all about working together with our communities so we share the same goals and everyone's involved. It's a topic that's front of mind for many dairy farmers, not just because of regulations, but because we care about the land and water we farm on. But here's the challenge. We've already done a lot of work and we keep going, but how do we bring all that effort together? How do we make sure everyone, not just farmers, but the whole community, is on the same path? That's why we've brought in 3 experts from DairyNZ. They've been working with farmers, iwi and catchment groups in some of the country's most pressured catchments, Southland, South Waikato and South Canterbury. Johan, Ron and Justin will share what's working, what's worth trying and how farmers are turning challenges into positive change, all while still running productive businesses. Let's get into it. Tēnā koutou, Johan, Ron and Justin, it's great to have you here. Can you each give us a quick intro, who you are, what you do and how it connects to the project? Well, we'll start with you, Justin.
Justin Kitto. I am now the Environment Manager here at DairyNZ and I am a freshwater ecologist. For the last number of years I've been working in that farmer policy catchment change interface, and a lot of my work now is working with catchment groups and farmers to enact environmental change on farm.
Ron?
Kia ora koutou, ko Ron Pellow. I have an agribusiness background, including nearly 10 years with the South Island Dairying Development Centre and Lincoln University Dairy Farm. I've had the privilege of working with leading farmers, primarily in the dairy sector, as they continue to develop and adopt best practice and emerging research to operate highly efficient dairy farms. Through related work, I've been involved in helping continue to reduce nitrogen losses while maintaining profitable, resilient dairy farm systems.
Thank you, Ron. And Johan?
Yeah, g'day, I'm Johan van Ras. I'm a dairy farmer just out of Morrinsville, where we're our family farmers. And I'm also an environmental specialist here at DairyNZ. And I've been tasked with helping bring the Pokaiwhenua catchment project to life. And hopefully we'll learn a little bit about that today.
All right, Justin, let's start with the big picture. What is the Sustainable Catchments program and why was it started?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So it's a project that DairyNZ started in 2018, and it was designed for DairyNZ with dairy farmers to lead change on farm and to demonstrate at scale and give farmers confidence at scale on how to improve waterway health. And so in the first 3 years, we started with the Taurua in the Manawatu. We worked in the Selwyn Hines and we worked in the Aparima catchment down in Southland. And those projects were about, in the Taurua, it was about implementing plantain on farm to give dairy farmers a pathway for consenting activities. Selwyn Hines, it was about giving those dairy farmers confidence and co-develop solutions on how to reduce their nitrogen footprint to comply with regional regulations. And then down in Aparima, it was more of a voluntary approach where we worked with a catchment group of all sheep farmers, dairy farmers to implement good farming practice at change and get all farmers a farm environment plan. And some of those projects, particularly the Taurua, were co-funded with the government. And then those projects ended. They tend to be 3-year projects. And then we were able to successfully put in a bid into the government's Jobs for Nature funding program. And that's what led to those 3 projects that we're going to talk about today. So that out of that, there was a total funding of $4.7 million, of which the government contributed $3.4 million. And we really worked hard across these 3 projects to collaborate between farmers, catchment groups and iwi. And obviously that government investment was able to amplify what we were able to do by ourselves.
Very good. Okay, Justin, you mentioned 3 catchments that you're working in, Pokaiwhenua, Waimea and South Canterbury. Why these 3? What makes them different?
I guess there's a few reasons for it. One, we wanted to get a spread across the country as sort of high level. And then most importantly is these were catchments that were of a size where they're big enough and there's a lot of landowners in there that we can work with those farmers, and as I said, get that scale of change. But also they weren't so big that what we were doing, it wouldn't be a drop in the ocean, would actually be able to potentially see some tangible benefits reasonably quickly. And then, as an example, Pokaiwhenua, it's got an awesome catchment group that we've done some work with previously. We had really great relationships with the local runanga, but also from a regulatory perspective, the catchment had been identified as a catchment that was at high risk from nutrient enrichment from nitrogen. So there was an opportunity there to work with the community, the farmers, the runanga, to address the environmental concerns in the catchment. And in particular, the nitrogen levels that were being discussed were potentially unachievable without going bankrupt. So we wanted to try other science-based solutions that would improve the environment, that were more affordable. And then when we moved south into South Canterbury, again, there's regional regulation down there to meet nitrogen limits. And based on the experience that we had in the Selwyn-Hines catchment, working with farmers in a co-developed way, partnering with them to find solutions that work, that are profitable based on the science that we've got and we've invested a lot in, so it's good to get it out there. There was an opportunity to work with the dairy farmers down there to help them achieve what they needed to achieve in a profitable way. And then finally in Waimea, again, a moderate-sized catchment that has a nitrogen enrichment issue. It's got degraded ecosystem health. And again, we wanted to work in that catchment to improve the health by looking at both the farm systems and the edge of field mitigations that could be applicable. In all of those groups, we just had really good farmers, really good connections with different community groups that we were able to partner with everyone and leverage that investment to drive change on farm.
And 3 years is not a long time, so having that existing momentum meant that you could actually achieve something in 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that was the important bit, is building on the momentum that was already there.
Yeah, cool. Oh, okay, let's hone in on the Waimea catchment where the project has built edge of field mitigations. What are these and how do they work?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So these are interventions or mitigations that are applied at the edge of a paddock, often right beside the waterway. And these are typically constructed wetlands or restored natural wetlands, bioreactors, or sediment traps or detainment bunds. And the way that the wetlands work is they just slow the flow down. The nitrogen-laden water is able to spend more time in contact with denitrifying bacteria that live on the plant matter or the organic matter that's living in the wetlands, and that's able to denitrify the wetlands. So the information that we have available is these can remove between 20 and 80% of the nitrogen dependent on the residence time. And they're also very good at slowing the flow, so reducing those peak flows for flood events. And wetlands are also some of the most biodiverse environments we've got on the planet. So they're very good for biodiversity. Then we've got bioreactors, so these are often basically bathtubs full of wood chip.
Right.
Tile drains flow through them, discharge into them, and because they're starved of oxygen, the bacteria that live in them, instead of consuming oxygen and breaking down the wood chip, instead they eat the nitrogen and convert it to a nitrogen gas.
Okay.
And again, they're really effective. We've got up to like 95% nitrogen removal in those tools. And then sediment traps are just, they capture that peak runoff that could be laden with sediment, and the water slowly decants and leaves the sediment behind, but the water keeps on going on its natural way. So Waimea project had two components. One of them was the edge of field stuff, and the other one was a farm systems component, which Ron will be able to talk about in a minute. But from the edge of field perspective, we built on some work that the catchment group had already been doing to identify nitrogen hotspots within the catchment. So once that report was finished, we got a very good appreciation of where the nitrogen was coming out of the groundwater and into the surface water. So as a consequence, we ended up building 13 edge of field interventions. 9 of them were traditional wetlands. 3 wood chip bioreactors were built, and we ended up developing 1 riparian margin as well. And the reason for that riparian margin, it was never intended, but I was standing by one of the wetlands one day and there was a culvert there and I saw a little fry fish swimming in the stream. So I went and got an eDNA sample from that site, and when the results came back, we discovered that there was actually a threatened fish living in that farm drain, a Golem galaxid. It was awesome. It was a nationally vulnerable fish, and I think what's awesome about that is, the farm we were working on was a 100-year farm, a multi-generational farm, and the farmer had never known that these rare fish were living in his waterway. The farmer ended up fencing off that waterway. We planted it with carracks to shade out and provide ideal habitat for it. But going back to those wetlands, there were 9 wetlands were built, constructed wetlands or just restoring natural wetlands. The smallest one was about 200 square metres and the largest one was about 4,000 square metres. We followed the NIWA constructed wetland guidance as best as we could. It didn't always work because obviously the farmers were telling us where we could and couldn't work, so we just had to apply the guidance to where we were allowed to work as best as we could. And we got in 25,000 plants into those wetlands as well. And the field day that we had, like the community and the farmers were absolutely amazed at what had been achieved and were excited about it. So, and I'll pass over to Ron now for the farm system side of it.
Thanks, Justin. We've had the opportunity to work with over 30 farms in South Canterbury, particularly in the Otops region, but also down in Waimea. And with those farms and their farm consultants and other connected people, we understood what the farm currently looked like. We looked at the total catchment impact of that farm as much as possible, i.e. where was the support land and what did that look like for the farm. And then we delved deep into the farm to look and see where are the opportunities to further reduce nitrogen losses and continue to maintain a really profitable, viable farm system. It was an interesting learning exercise as you learn and see where farms are on their journey. And the other thing we did in Fairlie in South Canterbury was we, with one of our water quality scientists, undertook some groundwater analysis. There's an interesting aspect, little known in Fairlie, but the shallow groundwater there is very young, less than 1 year old and part of the catchment, and a bit further up the catchment, probably less than 5 years old. What it means is for years where we've seen increasing trends in nitrogen in the shallow groundwater, that's now trending downwards. And while we see year-on-year variation due to rainfall and drought conditions, we're also seeing what we think is the impact of improved farm practices now visible in the groundwater. So really exciting to understand what that means for the wider catchment, for our deeper groundwater systems where that lag impact is longer. But great news coming out of those shallow groundwater systems, and we're continuing to do more work in other shallow systems as well to further understand what that means and reflect good practice occurring on farm.
So Johan, you worked in the Pokaiwhenua catchment. What did you actually do there?
Yeah, so the project, it started off as a thing to bring together that cultural science and Western science. So how do you do that? So we tried to look at things we could showcase to the community, working with both those things. And one of them was a showcase down in the back of Tokeroa on the rec grounds, which was also a neighbouring dairy farm was involved. And it was to bring a footpath in there to a really rundown area, do a lot of baseline sampling of those important values that our iwi want, because a lot of them were actually fishing out of there, still are, for eels, for mahunga kai. And so it's really cool to do something in town with a wider community, connected to a dairy farm, planted out. Another showcase bit that we did was on a dairy farm, and it was a really run-down sort of area, neglected area, still grazed. It was not non-productive. So it was going to be a way bigger catchment asset in itself if we could sort of restore it using those principles from a raukawa perspective, but also a lot of science in behind it, and bring back tuna, what we call tuna ponds, or restoring eel habitat or ponds. Because one of the big things for our project is Pokaiwhenua is restricted by the Karapiro Dam. So our tuna or eels, they have a migratory phase where the female, when she's, she might be up to 80 years old, those big eels, their mindset changes and they're like, hey, I'm off here. And they're off to Tonga and somewhere out in the South Pacific. And they die. Their alvas come back, they're young. We worked with an eel expert, Jacques Boubet, and we all learned a lot from a dude like that. And Raukawa is tasked with transferring female eels over to the dam so they can go upstream or downstream, and when the alvas come back up, they're tasked with transferring them up the catchment again. So they really need this to happen, and they need farmers to help build and create habitat. So that's what this showcase piece is. So hopefully we can bring back alphas and release them there. And the farmer has that connection with Raukawa to allow that all to happen. But yeah, that all this catchment space stuff is long-term game. So yeah, that's what we did, and worked with the local catchment group to initiate that and get that to happen. And then hopefully we can showcase this stuff to more farmers.
Okay. And Pokaiwhenua partnership with iwi is a big focus. What value have you seen from that partnership?
The big one there is just really learning what's important there to the iwi. That connection they have with land and water is really important. And they want to see both, really thriving, as we do as farmers. But Raukawa had also lost a bit of connection to those important sites that they value so much. So it's that link between farmers and iwi that not only allows that access to happen, but for us to work on those common positive values in this project. That's really been the highlight.
All right, so it sounds like there's a mix of Western science and cultural science being used. Johan, can you explain the difference in simple terms? What have farmers and the community been learning from this, and what's been working well?
Yeah, sure. Simple terms, but I'll just try to break it down with what we've been doing in terms of that Western science and what Raukawa has provided, and then try to work out how to explain the two. But so for DairyNZ, we've sort of initiated a lot of sampling, modelling work within the catchment and through our own science team at DairyNZ, but also contracting out to the likes of NIWA, things like that, and looking into getting eDNA results for the catchment, sediment surveys, shade modelling, things like that, even real-time monitoring systems. And all these things are awesome and provide a lot of data. They're very expensive. And it takes a long time to analyse these things, and then it needs to be interpreted into that sort of farmer practical understanding of what we can do. But whereas with the local knowledge or mātauranga and that cultural aspect, so Raukawa has brought their Te Arohi freshwater assessment tool, and that really brings that practical component to the project. It's standing at the edge of field, or it's standing in the paddock, it's standing on the edge of the stream, and as a farmer we can really relate to that because we know our properties and our streams, and it brings that visual aspect to things, and you get your own perspective of a site. How does it look? How does it even make you feel? That acknowledgement of, hey, some things might not look that good, so we don't feel good about it. So that's where the cultural aspect is really shone and is relatable to us as farmers. There's also been traditional monitoring techniques such as taukoda or taukiwai, which is a freshwater crayfish. It's a simple bracken bundle, inexpensive. Anyone has them. We can just go get one, chuck it in a stream, turn it upside down, leave it in there for a while. It creates habitat and allows our freshwater crayfish to come in. So we can connect like farmers we would have done when we were little, connecting back to our streams, catching eels and things like that. So that's where the two really align. Farmers know their land, they know their streams, and so a lot of the science shows us solutions, but it's those simple actions, just like plantings, that help a catchment. And as Raukawa has sort of showed us, it also really helps the community.
Okay, and it sounds like some of the mātauranga Māori, the Māori science is a little bit more accessible for us than things like stream shading or...
Yeah, no, it's really accessible. Anyone can do this stuff. It brings back to the things that are most probably common sense. Not that everything has to be cheap, but yeah, some of these things are just awesome tools that explain the same thing that science would.
Okay. You mentioned eDNA, and we have talked about it on a previous podcast, but for people that haven't listened to that one, can you tell us really briefly what is eDNA testing?
Yeah, eDNA is a simple sample that you chuck in your stream. It's like a filter that you leave in over time, 24 hours, something like that. It allows water to run through it. You send it away to a lab and it picks up anything that's living inside, outside of your water, from the fish, bacteria, birds. Even we've picked up a few birds. So it's just a really good way of connecting to your stream, finding that absence, presence, and talking with your local community about especially historical stories. That's where iwi comes in, about, hey, we used to have abundance of this here, or a lot of these things, and now we can sort of work together on trying to restore those things.
Okay. Riparian planting is another focus, Johan. What are the farmers and the community learning here?
riparian planting, or from that science work that DairyNZ has provided, the simplicity of the science of shade and how important shade is to a stream and to a catchment, that's one of the biggest take-homes from this work. And there's a magic number. So 70% shade over your stream, that's sort of a number you want to get to. And what that does is it cools the water and it shades out those weeds, which really suck up the oxygen. So it helps improve oxygen levels, dissolved oxygen levels within the water. So just like you and I, we need oxygen, fish do as well. And the riparian plants also, they stabilise banks. You're planting them along the edge of a stream. So it really minimises those impacts of sediment. And then on a catchment scale, when you do that science of shade, and if we can all do that 70% magic number on those smaller streams, what we call first, second, third order streams, which are the smaller streams in most catchments, if we all achieve that, then we have this massive impact on our catchment. And so these plants themselves, they're working to do all that, but they're also providing that habitat that we really need for our native fish and our birds. And that habitat, which brings them in, is our real connection piece with our community. It's the thing our community values. But there's always a but. In a catchment, for success like that, which we all want in a catchment, we all need to sort of work together to do this. And so a take home, if you had a take home from this, would be if you have a stream and you can shade it to 70%, then you are really doing your bit for an entire catchment.
Okay. You talked about the smaller streams. How hard is it to get 70% shade on a small stream on farm?
Yeah, it's as simple as how wide your stream is should be the height of the plants, as a simple way of thinking about it. So those smaller streams, those first order streams, they might only be a metre wide. They're just we call them a drain now because they're managed drains, but now they provide habitat, and a lot of our streams in New Zealand do have and host our native things. So yeah, on those small streams, just work on that, the width of the stream, the height of the plant, and most of them can be done by just simple carex or sedges, our native sedge, and they're really known to have strong roots to hold bank structure together. So and they're amazing for habitat. Our fish love that stuff.
Brilliant. Thank you, Johan. All right, to you, Ron. Looking at the farm system side, what kind of changes are farmers trying to reduce nitrogen loss and emissions but still stay profitable?
It's primarily about operating an efficient dairy farm system, limiting the purchase of excess nitrogen, retain nitrogen in the soil system, and export as much of it as milk and meat. It means when we use nitrogen fertiliser, use it to grow pasture really well, and then use our pasture management to optimise that resource. When we use other supplements, ensure they help reduce unnecessary nitrogen coming into the system or coming in the gate, and keep nitrogen plant available so we can turn it into milk and meat and export it again. And it also means considering the wider catchment, the additional support being required for the milking platform. Can we, for example, reduce the need for cropping to support winter feed requirements? Can we successfully operate our system with fewer stock and replacements as this reduces the wider catchment impact? And we must ensure we use infrastructure wisely to minimise drainage, including effluent and, where applicable, irrigation systems.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And if all dairy farms took up these changes, what results could we see?
We have the opportunity to do something we call catchment accounting framework, which is a way of cumulatively looking at the losses from all farms in a catchment and understanding how that changes over time. So we think in the Waimea year that dairy farms are already around 10% lower than their historic nitrogen losses, and that could extend to 15% with the continued uptake of good practice. Moving up to South Canterbury, or the OTOPS region, largely due to enhanced irrigation, we think nitrogen losses are already around 20% lower than they had been previously. And we think this is likely to increase to around 24% as farmers continue to adopt further on-farm efficiencies.
Okay, and can you, without naming names, talk about an example of a farmer that you've worked with on this? Like, what kind of changes did they make and what results did they see?
Well, one of the ones that comes to mind is a farm that has been on a continual journey of reducing their stocking rate over time as they've learnt to continue harvesting pasture really well with a slightly reduced stocking rate. And it means they have less total stock required in their business. It means they winter less stock. There is also farms that are looking to move away from as much cropping from a wintering perspective. And we know that cropping is a source of nitrogen losses, the cultivation impacts, the bare ground left after a single graze crop. So anything that we can do to have more permanent crops, permanent forages, all help reduce nitrogen losses. it's doing well with what we've got.
Johan, how involved are local communities in this project, and what difference does their involvement make?
That's massive, having community involvement. But for Pokaiwhenua, they really have an amazing farmer-led catchment group and a great connection to their local iwi as well. And like many catchment groups around New Zealand, they're really supported by local people that are really passionate and dedicated to help get those positive outcomes in the catchment for their community. So with Pokaiwhenua, the catchment itself, they have the Pokaiwhenua Catchment Group, which is led by Hadley Putt. And also Raukawa has a project team, or the environmental team, led by Aidan Rikitikanoa and Lisa Bigby. These people all have great connections to their local community. They have connections to volunteers, local knowledge, like local kaumātua, bringing those historical stories back to areas that could be on your farm, things like that. The catchment group itself has connections to awesome farmers who are sort of leading the way in this stuff, and you can, as a farmer, you can bounce ideas off. So that's really important to have that community connection. And these people are only a phone call away. They're there to help with advice. They're there to help to connect you with other people, and they might even sort you out with some funding if you talk nicely enough, eh? Communities working together in the space is what really makes that difference. Yeah, to do this work, we all need to know what we're doing on farm has that bigger purpose. And so for you as a farmer, working with your community, it connects you with them. It allows you to understand what they value in a catchment and what they see as water quality. But also, it's important for community to come out on farm and connect with you and understand what farming is all about and what you do and why you do it. And when you bring those two together, when you align, that's when the magic happens. And that's really evident in the Pokaiwhenua Catchment Project.
Brilliant. How did the Pokaiwhenua Catchment Group develop such a strong relationship with iwi? I'm sure at some point there wasn't, how did they go about that?
Yep. Andrew Lennox, so he's the man who no one can say no to, or he won't let you. He's amazing. Like, honestly, he is a farming and community legend, and the passion he had, or the vision to start a catchment group, he just kept pushing, and he honestly didn't have a connection with his local iwi, and he didn't even know where to start. And so he just started by knocking on the door of the local offices there and say, "Hey, I'm Andrew Lennox, I'm a farmer, I want to connect." And with iwi, a lot of cups of tea. Cups of tea is a classic example of any sort of relationship building. You meet someone, you've got to get to know them, and like I said earlier, you've got to know what values each other's has so you can work on those common goals together. And that's what's happened with the catchment group there. They started with lots of cup of teas, not coming up with solutions, coming up with just shared goals, and then working together on those to find the solutions.
Cool. All right. Justin, looking ahead, how can the learnings from this program be used across the country?
I think our learnings are completely applicable across the country, regardless of the fact that, we've trialled it or case studied it in some regions. I think they're applicable. And I was just listening to Johan's response there to how Pokaiwhenua developed that relationship with Raukawa and working with farmers in the catchment group. And that journey and that story is it can be applicable to any catchment throughout the country. It's just how you go about it with those cups of tea and getting to know people and seeing where people sit. So I think these learnings are applicable throughout the country. They're all based on science, but they're co-developed with farmers. Farmers have been a part of the journey the whole way through, and it's those principles that you can change and modify based on different soil types and different climates. Like the wetlands that we're doing, it just so happens that it happened to be in the Waimea. It could have been in any other catchment in any other part of the country, and we've learned so much from it of how to do this and how to make them fit and work within a dynamic landscape, and those learnings and those principles are easily applicable. Like we're now applying them to Canterbury because Canterbury just doesn't have the on-the-ground experience that what we do, but the lessons are still applicable. So, we're working on videos and we're working on resources at the moment to help extend those learnings. They're going to be awesome. They've been developed with farmers, for farmers. They haven't been designed by some office worker. They've been designed and developed by the farmers for farmers. So, they're going to be awesome. I don't know what else to say apart from the fact that it is applicable everywhere.
Brilliant. Back to you, Ron. For anyone listening who wants to get started, where should they begin?
2 places to start, Jack. The first is think about the nitrogen cycle as it applies to your farm. Think about what are the ways that we can reduce nitrogen coming in the gate? What are the things we can do to retain nitrogen in the soil so it's plant available? And what can we do to recycle more of that nitrogen as milk and meat out the gate? That's really what we want to do. So there's a number of things that we can do to impact those processes on farm. A really good thing to do for farmers is to look at their Farm Insights report or equivalent. Have a look at that report. See how purchased nitrogen surplus, for example, compares to other farms in your region. And then start digging into that report and discuss the opportunities that might be available on farm to reduce imported nitrogen, maybe supplement use or the type of supplement. What can we do to retain more nitrogen in the system? Is there a role for plantain, for example, in helping in that space? And how do we export more of the nitrogen that we currently import, send it back out as milk and meat? That's what we sell. That's the value in the nitrogen cycle for us. And the other really important thing is get involved in the local catchment group and your environment leaders, two really important groups of people where if we work collectively, we can continue to reduce our footprint and maintain a profitable, resilient dairy farm system.
And getting involved in those catchment groups, existing catchment groups and dairy environment leaders, of course, means that you're rubbing shoulders with farmers who potentially have a lot more experience and advice that you can learn from.
We do learn well off each other, and we love taking great ideas that someone else has developed and making it even better on our own farm. That's a core part of New Zealand's agricultural success.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Johan, Ron and Justin. It's really inspiring to hear how farmers, iwi and communities are working side by side, using both science and their local knowledge to make a real difference for our waterways and our land. If you'd like to know more about this work, you can read the story on page 8 of the August to October edition of Inside Dairy. And you can also check out dairynz.co.nz/catchment-support or dairynz.co.nz/riparian-planting. And there's good info on tools, planting guides and catchment support. And lucky for you, we're going to link to everything we've mentioned in this episode and other useful pages as well in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Talking Dairy. Mā te wā, mauri ora. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Talking Dairy. Make sure to hit follow so you can keep up to date with our latest episodes. You can also keep up with DairyNZ News on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn, or go to our website and sign up for our fortnightly DairyNZ News emails. As always, if you have any feedback on this podcast or have some ideas for future topics or guests to have on the show, please email us at talkingdairy@dairynz.co.nz. Mā te wā, mauri ora, catch you next time.